Okay, so keep it clean because this is being recorded. So welcome everybody. I hope you're. We got a lot of people on tonight, and so hopefully you're navigating this new app well. Couple things that I mentioned earlier. So you have the option to go with your webcam or not. If you go with your webcam, what I would suggest is to mute yourself, which you can do up at the top of your screen in that little app window. There's a microphone icon. Go ahead and mute yourself because the system will detect whoever's speaking and will highlight that person in the video box. So there's also a little chat box up on top with a little chat window that if you have a question you can ask that and it'll pop up for everybody. You know, and if you have a question you can just chime in as well. There's not a huge number of people on, so we can have a good dialogue, I'm hoping. So, onward. I chose this topic because of, well, the Thinking Points Journal kind of got me thinking about what progressives and Democrats need to do to win in 2018, and it's a conversation I've been having with a lot of people very recently. And this is based on not only ideas of cognitive framing, but also in terms of strategy and organizing. So I'm hoping that you know, some of you have worked on campaigns, some of you have run for office. So I'm hoping this can be a good discussion, and I'm actually hoping to share some of this with some of the folks I've been talking to as well. So away we go. So first things first. I wanted to use the recall as a little bit of an example of something that happened, something that had a lot of momentum, kind of formed into somewhat of a movement, but was unsuccessful in its goal. And the reason is that I think that what's going on at the national level is just an expansion of what happened with Walker getting elected in 2010 and then being recalled and going through the recall election. So the idea is, you know, what didn't we learn? Because clearly there are lessons there. The first one that I want to touch on is message related, of course, because that's why we're all here. But the first one is that the primary message or the primary ideas that the recall was based on was pretty much just anti-Scott Walker. Scott Walker was awful. He was mean. He hated workers. He hated Democrats. He hated progressives. And the recall was all about him. So it was largely a defensive strategy, a defensive idea from the get-go. And kind of coupled with that was that there was no counter or progressive idea to, as we all know, change the frame, but in more kind of common vernacular, there was no counter idea to get people to not think of Scott Walker and think of a different way forward. And to me, this was the biggest problem. And if you go back to those times, even in 2011 when everything first started, and then even before the petitions were launched and that kind of thing, you go back and read some of the things that people like George Lakoff wrote, people more local. There was this kind of concern that, okay, you're against Walker, but what are you for? And it was something that never really coalesced, never really came together. And it became, this is about attacks on workers, this is about attacks on labor. Again, this is all about who Scott Walker despises, and nothing really for people to hang their hat on. And when you look at any of the decent polling post-recall, a lot of people didn't vote in the recall election because they didn't think the recall was justified. So there's a lot that speaks to kind of what we're going through now. In terms of the kind of resistance movements that are popping up now. And resistance is fine and dandy, but again, what are you for? So anyway, so those are the two messaging aspects, the anti-Walker defensive message and no counter to the conservative ideas that Walker stood for. So secondly, the recall was largely a statewide campaign. And what I mean by that is, while a lot of the petition drives were happening at the local level, you know, it was largely grassroots people going out and spreading petitions and doing the legwork on the ground. That was the local aspect, but in terms of a larger campaign, there was no statewide infrastructure to support what was going on. So you had all the petition gatherers and nearly 1 million signatures. In fact, behind me you can see a 5 from one of the signs the night of the party. You know, it was a very local effort to gather the petitions, but there was no statewide support or infrastructure to help things coalesce into a movement. And then I think a function of that was that you came away with kind of the standard statewide Democratic candidate running a standard Democratic campaign. And of course it was Tom Barrett who had lost before. So there were all sorts of kind of issues with not only the candidate, but how that very loosely run statewide campaign led to that type of a candidate. So, I mean, I think those are some of the big lessons that we can look at in terms of both strategically and structurally. And the result was that, you know, if you consider the recall a resistance, which it was a resistance to Scott Walker, it was really beaten back, and it not only set the stage for Walker's second term, but it really started the slide of those western counties along the Mississippi starting to go more conservative and vote more towards Republican voters, as you can see from that map, which is the change from the 2010 gubernatorial election to the 2012 recall election. You know, the more red, the bigger the swing towards Republicans, and you see along the western Mississippi, all those counties that had voted for Obama previously, they started the switch to Walker. So it really started, and of course then you see the Fox Valley also going in that direction largely, and the north central part of the state. So it had a lot of consequences, and you know, since then there have been ongoing efforts to try to still coalesce, but they've been unsuccessful. And going to the next slide, so what should we learn for 2018? What are the takeaway lessons? Well, I feel like, based on what I've been doing for the last 5 years, is that there were 3 major aspects of campaigning that were lacking in 2012. First of all, a cognitive strategy. That's number one, and we've talked about that enough before. This idea of a progressive, moral, positive vision that brings people together. Secondly, a local progressive strategy. That's, again, it starts local. We'll get to that more in a minute, but it's supported by statewide infrastructure and resources statewide. Not just a bunch of, and there's nothing wrong with grassroots groups, that's not what I mean, but just a bunch of grassroots groups that all do their own thing without any connectivity, without any support from any kind of organizational structure in terms of funding, because we have to be honest that you can't run a campaign for free and be effective. It does cost money. Other resources like boots on the ground. For example, lots of great local candidates struggle with getting boots on the ground to help support their campaign efforts. And in rural Wisconsin, where there's very little, if no media at all, there's a lot of space between homes and families and things like that, and you need a vast network of volunteers to not only get your message out, but to connect with people. So that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about with a local strategy that's supported by statewide infrastructure resources. Thirdly, then, based on the first two things, is the need for authentic progressive candidates that live and project progressive values, not just regurgitating partisan positions. So what I mean by that is, so anybody can, say, run for office, have a whole lot of money behind you, and just regurgitate all the talking points that you're handed to by Assembly Dems or Senate Dems or something like that. And yeah, Steve and Nancy Arnold, who've just had an experience with a campaign, a great point with resources, provide the data structures. And it's absurd that people who are going to commit a huge chunk of their life to running a campaign and putting their neck on the line has to not only pay for access to data, but that data is awful. That it's, anybody that's used the VAN or any of those tools knows that they are awful. They're not up to date. They're out of date. They haven't been updated correctly in years, and it's a big waste of time trying to go through and sift and find out what's good data and what's not. And then also getting help using that data, getting help using those resources. So, and no wonder it's hard to get people to run for office when none of these three things exist in the kind of political world as we know it. So let's go a little more in depth in terms of what that looks like. And feel free to ask questions, make suggestions, because I want to just go point by point here.
One thing I would say, Scott, on that last slide, it's not going to be until we have good progressive candidates that we're going to have that local progressive strategy supported by statewide infrastructure and resources. I mean, really, I think that's where a leader leads the creation of that, because right now people are feeling so burnt out and cynical,
Yeah, I agree that somebody needs to step up and embrace this type of thing.
Yeah.
I also think to also add on to what you are saying, Mark, is I think it will end up being kind of a self-perpetuating system. If you have a good progressive leader that steps up and says, yep, we're going to invest in this kind of structure, we are going to invest in this kind of strategy, this is what we're going to do, then I think that will feed into having the progressives candidates step up and
Right.
step forward. You know, so
Bernie was an example.
What's that?
Bernie was an example. He started with nothing, you know.
Yeah.
And then the money even showed up, you know.
Yeah, and he underestimated his chances of winning too.
Yeah.
At the beginning, right? I mean, at the beginning, he didn't really have infrastructure on the ground in all the states he needed to win, and then all of a sudden, you know, they get swept away by this movement. And yet, you know, Mark, to your point, that movement is still looking for the second point.
Yes.
You know, local strategies supported by bigger infrastructure. It's still looking for that, and it's still looking for a cohesive cognitive strategy. So,
And,
you know,
and I'll shut up here in a second, but the one thing that I would say about that is we've seen Bernie, I think, kind of turn too much towards the party, you know, and
that's, yeah, and I think we've seen that happen at the state level too, is you get some really good progressives that come in as freshman assembly reps, and they have this, you know, all this energy, and then they kind of turn towards the party, and it all goes away.
Yeah.
And one question I would love to ask Bernie is, you know, is he doing that for his own political livelihood, or does he have some kind of an idea that there can be an upheaval within the party, and that, you know, because I don't see a third party being viable anytime soon.
Yep.
So, yeah, good points. So what do these three things look like? And this is, I'm sure that there will be more discussion in the specifics, but so the first thing in terms of a cognitive strategy, this is something that so when I first started working with Lakoff a number of years ago, I kept hearing him referring to this idea of a cognitive strategy. And he's kind of been bringing it up again more and more. If you follow what he's been doing recently, and what I would suggest is do a Google News alert for George Lakoff, so you can catch interviews and things that he does, because he's all over the place right now, is this idea that what conservatives had back in the 30s as a response to the New Deal was they had a cognitive strategy. And that cognitive strategy was, here's what we believe. We believe that capitalism is the equivalent to Christianity. We believe in discipline leading to success. We believe that government gets in the way of people's success because it impedes personal profit. It impedes you getting discipline because of social safety nets. And everything we do, everything we say, every piece of legislation is going to connect with this cognitive strategy. And they were very disciplined about it, and it really took off during Reagan. Just completely went crazy because they started funding think tanks in the billions of dollars to do it. So that cognitive strategy has been decades in the making. And progressives, Democrats have not embraced a cognitive strategy. So what does a cognitive strategy looks like? Well, it provides people a progressive vision to believe in. And it gives you the foundation for people to accept the truth about what progressive values are and what they mean. And in addition to changing people's worldview and countering decades of conservative dominance, I guess one of the points I would raise, because it's something that I've noticed recently, is that you'll see people are talking a lot about communicating progressive values now. And it's kind of a hot topic of discussion. And you see it all the time. They throw in words like opportunity and fairness and equality and all those great buzzwords, and freedom even. And I think it's great because people are starting to think that way now. But what they're not doing is connecting it with the progressive frame. So that, for example, people can view opportunity in the conservative frame. So if they think that government squelches opportunity, that's in the conservative frame. You see what does that make sense? So providing the progressive frame that says freedom comes with a responsibility to care for others' freedom, that private prosperity depends on the public, on all of us working together. Those are very different ideas in terms of what opportunity, freedom, and fairness look like from what conservatives say. And you hear conservatives using the same words all the time. So, now comes the task to actually start framing things well and in a way that changes people's worldview. And so we've talked about this a lot, breaking down the wall between government and the people. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So that's kind of a cognitive strategy. And everything needs to revolve around that. So when you are with your local resistance group or your indivisible group or your grassroots group, and you decide that you're going to launch a campaign that is pro-public schools, how do you communicate within that cognitive strategy to demonstrate to people the importance of public schools with a progressive vision, i.e., we have a responsibility to care for each other. We do that through public schools, private prosperity because of public, and then working in all those ideas with your message. And that's the challenge, because those ideas aren't just floating out in the air. We have to create them. So the next one, thanks to Mike McCabe, I've been talking about this one a lot and thinking about it a lot, is this idea of local strategy. And this is a hard one because there's no statewide infrastructure to support it, as we've been talking about. But the idea is that starting a local strategy that includes the cognitive strategy makes it all about community. And what's important about that is we know all politics are local. Scott Walker didn't start out, just dropping out of the blue. He came up through conservative grassroots, same with a lot of Republican assembly reps. All politics are moral. People don't engage in politics or have a position on something that they think is, or support something that they think is evil or wrong. I use the example, Paul Ryan thinks he's very moral in terms of when he introduces policy. And whether you think he's moral or not is beside the point, because in his worldview and the people that are with him and support him, he is moral. So all politics are local, all politics are moral, and having a local strategy provides a foundation for authentic, connected local and regional candidates, right? So I'm fascinated to watch the discussion on social media about, well, so now who's going to run for governor for the Democrats? There were, all these names floating around out there, and a lot of them have dropped off. And who is an authentic, connected, local, regional, statewide candidate that is recognized in their community and has the potential to, carry that set of values statewide. There aren't that many people. There honestly aren't. I can only think of 2 or 3 that come to mind that can really pull that off. And whether they're interested in running for statewide office is another thing. And that gets back to this idea of having a local strategy that's supported statewide. Because, where are the county board members? Where are the current assembly reps? Where are the current state senate reps? Where are the school board members? Where are the municipal leaders who are not only qualified and ready to take the next step in terms of a campaign and office, but where's the support system for them? So the local strategy is, I think, is critically important. And while there are groups in different communities, Steve and Nancy can speak to how difficult it is to engage people to be volunteer on a campaign, how difficult it is to get the numbers you need. And part of that is because for progressives and for Democrats largely, this is not standard practice. We rely largely on a state party to come in and run a campaign. And there's very little local infrastructure for that. So that's the local strategy piece. And finally, I think this gets to Mark's comments about the progressive candidates. Authentic progressive candidates, and I have the Women's March picture up there, because I think that was largely based on empathy and caring for people. And I think, with that and the scientists and all the indivisible people, I still have hope that they can coalesce around something bigger than, a subset of an issue or group or something like that. So, but talk about authentic potential there. Authentic candidates are connected with people, and Bernie is a perfect example of that. He didn't have to explain who he was or what he believed in or anything like that. You just know who he is, and people felt a very strong connection to him, and it was very authentic. So Bernie is a great example of that on the national level. Again,
the other thing he did, Scott, that I think was so important was he wouldn't back away from the questions about how, you're a socialist. How could you be a socialist in America? And I think back on some of those television interviews when the questioners would start going into personality issues, and he would just shut that down, and he went to values, he went to the issues related to the values, and he just wasn't cowed,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously that's because not only is he authentically believing and speaking what he believes, but he's also led and lived that way. So it was so unlike someone who's handed a script,
yep.
right, and is told, okay, here's what you say, right, and then the next advice they would get is, oh, and if you get attacked on this, then we have to sound like a moderate, right? We can't sound too progressive because then they'll label us a socialist or, right, something like that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's exactly why he inspired so many people who saw that, okay, maybe I don't agree with him on this specific issue, but he really is, he's the real deal, and he does what he says and he lives what he says, and
he
I
showed
like that.
courage.
Courage, yeah.
Yeah.
Ironically, that's the same qualities that the people who voted for Donald Trump
Yes.
say. I can, okay, so he, doesn't treat women that great, and but wow, he says what I believe. He's going to make my life great again because that's just who he is. And look at how successful he is, so he must know what he's talking about. I mean, yeah, it's the same thing, that people saw that as being more important than, again, a subset of issues. And this idea, the second point I have there is this idea, being known as a people's leader based on authentic qualities. That gets to what you were saying, Mark. People didn't gravitate to Bernie Sanders. People didn't gravitate to Donald Trump. People don't gravitate to an Elizabeth Warren because of their position on issues. They gravitate toward them because they have authentic qualities and values that people identify with. So, if, and I just underscored this idea that people vote morals and beliefs, not a list of issues. But, we're going to need to
It's all on the phone.
Oh, sorry.
I can't get anything on the computer.
Oh, I thought I heard somebody asking a question there. If we're going to win elections in Wisconsin again, especially statewide elections, we need to win people back who just voted for Donald Trump. I mean, all those people in the Fox Valley in western Wisconsin that had voted for Obama twice and then all of a sudden voted for Trump, or they didn't show up because they didn't think there was anything worth voting for, we have to win them back. And you're not going to do that by saying, okay, here's our laundry list of issues. We're for you if you are pro-gay marriage, pro-women's health care access, pro-immigrant rights, pro-racial justice, et cetera, pro, et cetera, pro, et cetera. I mean, that's not going to bring those people back. So this idea of having authentic progressive candidates that come out of, if I go back a few more slides, right, that come out of these three aspects working together, if we don't have that, then we're just going to be stuck with, again, people who are chosen by a group of county parties or a congressional district committee or a county party or something like that, and said, hey, you should run, and here's a list of talking points, and okay, good luck. That's not going to win very many seats back. So anyway, so that's kind of the three-tiered stool there. Going to open up the last part here for comments, questions, discussions. If any of you have ideas and things like that are happening or experiences, now's the time.
Scott, put the list of 3 things back on the screen.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Oops. One, two. There we go. Okay, slide number 4.
I'm done. Carry on. I just wanted that for reference.
Okay.
I think one missed opportunity in that recall was that the labor unions came across as being just about themselves, greedy. They got such a good deal. What are they complaining for? And it's time that they get knocked down a peg. And I think that they could have really pivoted nicely and said, you know what? we do have some very nice benefits, and we know how to get those. And you know what? We'd be willing to help you and your fellow employees in your organization learn how to do that, you know, and really kind of they could have pivoted and turned it into kind of a labor organizing effort, you know, and and that would have shown that they care about non-union workers and they're willing to help. And I think that would have made them look much better in contrast to Walker and his corporate sponsors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially even moving forward, you know, how labor unions need to start kind of rebranding themselves and rejuvenating this idea that, you know, they protect people, they can provide them with a better quality of life. That, and like you said, Mark, that what's interesting is that they fell right into the trap that Walker and the conservatives laid for them. You know, the divide and conquer strategy.
Yes.
You know, and they fell right in that trap about making it about workers' rights, when it should have been about everybody's quality of life in Wisconsin and how they can help make your life better in, you know, Barron County. You know, okay, you know, you don't have a strong union presence in Barron County, but here's what we can do to help make your life better.
Right.
And by the way, we're public employees and we get paid for you, so we're protecting you.
Mm-hmm. I think they could have also said, as would be true with me, folks, if you think back on it, you probably had a grandfather or grandmother who was in a union, and it provided the kind of stability that really helped your family, you know. And then that would, and most people, like my grandfather was in the railroad workers union, you know. Most people know that history, but they need to be reminded of it. And so all of a sudden, the labor folks are kind of like, well, my grandpa, and I love my grandpa, you know.
Yeah.
It was.
I mean, you know, Don has a good point there, you know, about the idea that, you know, raising all boats.
Yeah.
You know, the idea that it raises all boats, and that's a perfect example of how. And look, I mean, the other point with labor, as long as we're on that topic, is, you know, you talk about community organizing and having a community type of campaign presence year-round. Look, the unions should be out helping to build this kind of a local strategy year-round, not just when there are labor candidates on the ballot, or not just when, you know, labor's livelihood is threatened. And there are some unions that do that, don't get me wrong, but there are a lot that don't. And there are a lot that don't get involved in the community unless it's specific to their local. So, you know, that's part of that living by what you say thing, which, you know, it's hard to counter that if they're not living up to that standard. As Don says, you know, they can set a standard that raises all boats, but sometimes they can also demonstrate the acting in your self-interest, just as with any group. Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, Steve and Nancy. Yeah, I mean, for the most part, the big unions, the big boys, have been relatively selfish, you know, and pandering to issues. And that's part of the, you know, you notice nowhere in this, what we should have learned from the recall, nowhere in there does it say we need to do more issue communicating, or we need to do more issue education, because that's not the case. I use the whole job creation thing as an example all the time. There's nobody who votes in Wisconsin that is not aware that Scott Walker has not created the amount of jobs that he promised to create. Everybody knows that. But guess what? They don't care. Because
care.
Just like with Donald Trump's shortcomings or Bernie Sanders' shortcomings or anybody else you can think of who is successful in terms of politics, people don't vote for them on a single issue. They vote for them because they believe in them. So, yeah.
I'm avoiding this resist idea because that to me is a negative approach. I've come up with a theme like better choices and directions. I think that's a little more positive. And the other thing I'm trying to do, I've got George Lakoff's book, Political Mind, right in my hand here. And the fact is that what I like to do is see us reduce some of it, maybe oversimplify it, but 5 ways in which the government is there to protect you and 5 ways in which the government is here to empower you and dwell upon that and reduce it. I was looking at the Democratic political platform the other day. I've got it on my computer. My God, it goes on for page after page after page. Nobody looks at that. Nobody listens to that. You've got to reduce it to the simplest kind of denominator, and you've got to focus on these are the 5 things that you can remember and make that stick in their minds. That's what you've got to do. When you're not going to rally up. The other thing that irks me considerably, and I'm in Winnebago County, but the fact is we got a lot of good people in the organization who work their hearts out to raise money, to get voters out. But you know what? I don't see any real community leaders show up. I know people in this community are influential. They've got education. They've got positions. They've got influence. But they're never showing up to do the work. They don't show up to serve as leaders. They're kind of hanging back that, well, maybe if we get somebody really good for governor, then I'll be at the meeting. I bet at these meetings the gubernatorial candidate shows up, and here they all are, and they're here to suck up and kiss up and show, boy, I'm here, and I'll write my check. But don't ask me to do any real work. And that's really irritating, and that wears out the troops on the ground who are really trying to keep it going. And I don't know how to get these people to work on that, but that does bother me considerably.
Wow. That's a brilliant observation. And I can actually, now that you mention it, I had the same experiences. So, yeah, Steve and Nancy, I can get to you in a second, and also Don's, reframe, recruit, train, resist, sustain.
Yeah.
I love the idea of a very simple, here's 5 ways government protects you, here's 5 ways government empowers you, and I would go one step further and say, here's 5 things we do together to empower each other, here's 5 things we do together to protect each other.
Wow, good. Yeah, I like that.
And because it's part of this idea of breaking down the wall that, this very unconscious reaction. Anytime people say government, it's, scary. Scary thing that's going to come and take away my money and my guns. Ooh.
Yeah. Good point, Scott. Yeah, that's a good concept. Thank you. That helps. How the community literally can protect you and empower you. Government just happens to be an agent.
Yeah.
It's not. We're running the government. The government is not running us. That's how the conservatives really outflank us there. They say the government's coming in. It's going to do this. They'll do this for you. They'll take away all these things. Say no. The community should do this. This is the community's job, and the government just happens to be an agency, and that's what we hire it for in a very real sense. Yeah. That's I like that approach. Thank you. Yeah, that helps a lot.
And even to the extent that that helps provide people with that positive vision of what government can be.
Yes.
Kind of like Bernie Sanders saying, here's the kind of country we can have.
Yes.
We all work. Yeah, good. Okay, Steve and Nancy, your story on cognitive strategy.
Yeah, it's just Steve's story.
Okay.
I'm not seeing my picture, but can you hear me?
Oh yeah, you're up.
Oh, now I see it. My heart was warmed today. I saw this online. I assume it's in the printed Cap Times that came out today. they had an editorial and they talked about local democracy, and they did not talk about local control. They studiously avoided local control, which the right interprets to mean control the locals, and used our framing local democracy, which constantly reminds us that the power comes from the bottom. And so the whole editorial was good, but that was something that I noticed that they had very studiously followed throughout the editorial, and I was just great to see that. I've been talking from time to time, Dane County Cities and Villages and the folks at the statewide League of Wisconsin Municipalities. They used to talk about preemption and local control, and I coached them over and over again to use the term local democracy, which both of them have switched to.
Good, fantastic.
Good.
Yeah, next thing we have to get Democrats to stop using the term job creation. But I think that's just job creation is one they need to stop using, and hardworking families. Every time I see a press release saying how Democrats are fighting for hardworking families, I'm thinking, oh, geez.
You know, with the media, I was reading an article in These Times, which is, good, stout, progressive publication. And the thing that amazed me is how they would use phrases like the conservatives are proposing Social Security reforms, and they'd be criticizing what they were doing. And, I actually want to call the editor of that publication and ask him to please look at stuff like that. And also on regulations, in the same article, they were talking about reforming regulations or turning back regulations, and instead use the word protections.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's so frustrating that our left-wing media doesn't even get it.
Yeah, and it's because all of this stuff comes out of the issue groups that run their focus groups, or they do their polling, and the stuff, it'll poll well, or it'll focus group well. Well, yeah, of course it does, because people understand the metaphors. So if they understand the metaphors, they're going to relate to them, and then it'll poll well, or it'll focus group well. Yeah, a colleague of mine in Minnesota, George Green, has for a few years now been working with the Democratic Farm Party in Minnesota as they've emerged to kind of forward more progressive ideas, and he's been working with them for a while, and he's been, he and I have been communicating, and one of the things he says, he said, wow, it's hard enough to get people to do this, but when you have people in your own party who continually, repeat these ideas like jobs creation and hardworking families, and you can't get them off of them, it makes it even harder. But to Steve's point, there is a little bit of turning going on, and people are starting to think about it. So now's a good time to really start hammering it home. So nice. So anybody else have any other thoughts, or because we're closing in on the 8 o'clock hour here? Appreciate all the discussion.
Are there progressive Republicans, and I say that, in kind of a broad, I'm sure there are some Republicans who say, yeah, I'd like to see some things differently. The question is, how do you reach out to these people and say, hey, join us in a community? You don't have to be a Democrat. Be a progressive. To me, a progressive is a really good, middle or moderate position. Hey, I want to keep some of the good stuff. There's some of the old traditional things are really rock solid basis of our community and our nation, our society. But there are also things that need to be improved. There are things that need to change. And you can be both. I mean, when I argue this with parents, I say, I got one foot in one camp here, and yeah, there are some things I want to see because I firmly believe in the Constitution, things of that sort, but you've got to go the other way. There are other things that need to be done, and we can have both, and we need both. We need better. I always argue for better balance in the legislature, better balance in all the rest. You can't, ships tip over. You run too many people to one side of the vessel, that thing's going to tip over and create all kinds of chaos. And people listen, and it's like, yeah, I want to believe you, but.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, especially because things are so polarized.
Yes, that's the sad part about it. Yeah, that's
right.
Really sad.
I mean, the moment sometimes the moment you mention progressive, people will, like some Trump voters will immediately lock up and
yes,
have the preconceptions. One of the things that I've been counseling people to do is, look, don't start with a political conversation. Start with a conversation about what you care about in the community, or things that you do to help people in the community, or what your concerns are for the community. And start making it a discussion about those types of things so you can so yes to Dom's question and yes to Steve and Nancy's question. I'll get to you in a minute.
That's fine.
So having said that, sometimes it's just a matter of getting people to open up about something that they care about, and then coming to the conclusion that you can work on it together and leave parties out of it and just start the conversation there and leave the politics out. And at some point, you have coffee or something and have some congenial discussions about what a prosperous community looks like and how everybody has to work together to make that happen.
Well said.
Start very broadly. So Don's question is, what is my substitute for job creation and hardworking families? As I've mentioned, so with the job creation thing, you have to change the entire economic frame away from the market, the free market, away from personal choice. And one way to do that is to talk about people who work and people who are living in the community as profit creators, and that that, for example, the corporation has a moral responsibility to pay people a living wage portion of profit they've created, and that, for example, the public, government, and unions act to protect people who create profit from greed and corruption, so that they get the fair share of profit that they've created. So that's, and thank you. You took the word, so right. I don't understand where this hardworking families thing came from. Again, it must have focus group well for somebody, but why not just say families or people in the community or Wisconsinites or, people, just people. By putting that qualifier in, you are evoking this idea that people who succeed are hardworking and disciplined, and people who are hurting, they've just not worked hard enough. So they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and so just leave the whole hardworking thing out of there. It is part of the cognitive, yes. Hardworking is part of the cognitive strategy, yes. And somewhere in a think tank in Bethesda, Maryland, somebody pops a bottle of Dom Perignon every time somebody repeats the term hardworking because they've succeeded. Critical media and fact checking is important as long as it is done in the context of a frame. So, for example, fact checking can be done well as long as you frame what it is the facts are about. So, for example, the Rachel Maddow model of saying, here's what Donald Trump says, here's why it's wrong, is awful, because you're just repeating his message, his frame. So with the fact-checking and critical media, you need to first put the issue or whatever it is in the progressive frame. So, for example, like with immigration, you have to talk about how, the current occupant of the White House, how his immigration policies are taking away freedom to pursue a prosperous life for millions of people. You could change the frame. So, yeah. And that's a hard one. There are media that do it, and there are media that don't, because they think that just reporting what Trump said is responsible reporting, because you're getting both sides of the story in. But unless there's opposition that's reframing, and it's not happening. 2 new comments. Yeah, that's the truth. Statewide, local is really awful, is really lacking, especially because nothing gets reported outside of the Capitol Dome, and that's really hard. So, part of a cognitive strategy to have some kind of local communications network that can reframe and then provide facts to support the new frame. So.
Hey, Scott?
Yes.
Can I just put in a pitch for some changes I've made on the Commoner call?
Absolutely. Yeah. And send me if you send me a link, I'll share it out tomorrow as well. But yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. But the Commoner call, we're coming out on Mondays and Thursdays, and totally redesigned website. I think it's working really good. One of the files that I'm keeping is Your Brain on Politics, including a lot of this language stuff and cognitive reframing. The other thing that I'm making available is I've got at this point a little over 200 political cartoons on a wide variety of issues. I don't have them all downloaded into it yet, but I'm plugging away at that, and I want everybody to know those cartoons, those editorial illustrations, any of the photos that I'm putting up are free to use with, I don't charge anything for it. If you've got a flyer, if you've got a newsletter, if you've got a website that you're putting together, you can access that free art.
Fantastic. And if you haven't checked it out, I would do it. I get the daily, the Monday and Thursday. What's that?
The Commoner call.
I get the Commoner call by email, and it's a really great compilation of really important progressive news and information, and good commentary too. So, and the cartoons are fantastic. So, yeah. Well, it's 8 o'clock, so thank you, everybody. Good discussion. I feel like this system works well. I'm thinking of sticking with it because I like seeing people and hearing voices and not just having chat boxes, but the chat box is nice and we can record it. So without further ado, I'll say good night and thank you all very much for your time.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.